I want to start off this lesson today with a fairly simple question that has a very complicated answer, and that is who owns the ocean? And when I ask this to my students, I get a lot of puzzled looks. A lot of the kids in my last period class today were saying that it was Poseidon. Poseidon owns the ocean. Or literally, some kids said, Jesus owns the ocean. And so obviously, they're giving me these funny answers because they don't know what the answer is. And that's fine because literally, people who are like 70, 80 years old and are sitting at the table and discussing who owns which part of the ocean, they don't even really understand who owns the ocean. So let's take an example. For instance, this area. Where is my mouse? Okay, there we go. I want to look at this area. Now, this is the area that we're studying in my world geography class right now. I am making this area kind of Southeast Asia. Specifically, the Indochina Peninsula is what I'm talking about, but also for this specific part of the lesson, I'm going to go ahead and include the Philippines, Malaysia, and this whole area. Now, at this point, I ask my kids to use common sense and to simply, I give them a map that looks like this. And then I give them 4 different colored markers. And I ask them to mark the boundary lines of the ocean claims for these countries. Now that sounds kind of confusing, but let's try it out. Okay, let's go to paint here for a second. Let's say we're looking at Malaysia, for instance. Okay, so we'll make this white to make it so that you can see it, and I'll make it bigger. So I'm trying to figure out how far out in the ocean a boat can go and still claim to be gaining resources for the specific country. Okay, including things like oil and including things like fish and other natural resources. So let's say I say Malaysia, you can go out this far, and well, there's Singapore down there, but let's say like that far. Then we'll do that over here like this, and then around, oops, that was too far, but around something like this. Okay, so essentially what I'm saying here is that basically within this white line up into the coast is what Malaysia should be able to get for things like oil and fish. So I give them that first one. I give them, again, 4 markers. I need them to figure out what they think is fair for Vietnam, what they think is fair for China, what they think is fair for the Philippines. Now, they are thinking about this from the point of view of someone who has no stake in this situation. They're thinking about it from purely common sense. And I asked them to think of themselves as someone who's trying to be a peacemaker and then just make these common sense borders so that these countries can get together and not have an issue. Now, again, this is before I show them what the real map looks like. Now, a lot of the kids for the Philippines, they just basically drew a line around the Philippines and said, yeah, there you go, that makes sense. No one, it's not in anyone's way, so that's pretty easy there. And then, for instance, let's do Taiwan. They'll say, okay, it goes from their border, and then there's like a little bubble around Vietnam. And then China, okay, well, China has this area right here, so let's go ahead and incorporate Taiwan and just make it like that. So that looks pretty good to me. That looks like pretty common sense stuff that everyone has, like a little bubble of water around their property, around their islands. But if we were to look at a real map, it would not look like that. In fact, if we look at China's, and I undo China's, this is what China more like says is their boundary. Here we go. This is all of mine. All of mine. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll have this. And there we go. That's more like it. China essentially claims this entire thing. Now, when we are talking about international relations and politics, we're talking about, again, a table where old men are sitting and they're discussing these issues. But you might as well pretend like they are 2-year olds because they are going to go with their most basic human functions. Now, one of the things that children, one of the phases, you could say, I guess, that children go through is their obsession with the word mine. And they say it over and over again, mine, 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 mine. They love stuff. Now, I ask my kids, I bring that up to them, and then I ask my students, I say, hey guys, how many of you do not like people touching your stuff? Everyone will raise their hand. Everyone. No one likes it when people touch their stuff. This stuff is mine. That stuff is yours. Do not touch my stuff. If you touch my stuff, you're not going to like what happens. So leave me alone. Leave my stuff alone. Now, we live in Texas. So, I mean, this is not any kind of legal advice, but depending on the circumstances, if someone is trespassing on your property and you shoot them, I mean, whatever, you're defending your own property. Property is a huge, huge deal. Not only because of the most basic idea of mine, but also because it is your livelihood. And also money is attached to this. So land is super important. So when we see China make a huge freaking land claim like this, or in this case, sea claim, I suppose. I don't know what it's actually called, but let's just say a sea claim like this. I mean, that's the most basic kind of human thing is, I want more, give me more. So they take more and more and more. Now that can become a dangerous situation, but I'll get to that in just a second. Now, remember this map. Again, we kind of made it so that it's just common sense kind of situations here. But let's look at the real one, okay, in just a second. Now, I put here, many times territorial disputes between countries do not involve logic or fairness. Now, again, the map that we made was basically common sense. And yet, when we look at the real map, we're not going to see that. And if we look at the law that is made by the United Nations, okay, and this says in 1982, they made the law of the sea, which says that the coastal waters extend at most 12 nautical miles, but then I think it's about the 200-mile mark away from your coast is your economic zone. So essentially anything within 200 miles of your coast is your oil, it is your fish, it is your natural gas, whatever resources are there within that 200 miles of your land is yours. So let's look at what the real map looks like according to the Philippines, Vietnam, China, Malaysia, and all these people. This gets very complex. Again, land is something that people are willing to not only risk their lives about, but they're willing to very much go to war and send other people there too. Now, imagine if you were like, for instance, right here and you were drilling oil. That would be an issue. Who do you ask for permission when you're in like five different people's claims? Whose oil is that underneath the ground? I don't know. Okay, so it causes a lot of issues. Now, here's the thing about China, and the same is true about Russia. China and Russia play an extremely long game of chess. Now, a metaphor that I use with my class is pretend that you have a bank. Now, you do not want to get robbed, of course. But let us say that you are going to get robbed, and there are two robbers. One is high on drugs, crazy, impulsive, and just will go into your place, shoot up a little bit maybe, steal your money, and leave. The other robber thinks well in advance. They have everything planned out. They stole a car, switched the plates, they've covered their faces, they've done everything right. Which robber will you more likely get your money back from? You want, if you were to have a robber, okay, obviously you would like to prevent that. But if you did have one, you would prefer the person to be the crazy one, the one on drugs, because they're more likely to be caught. Now, that is an analogy for international relations, and it sounds crazy. But when you have an impulsive person, yes, let's say a dictator, that person is going to kill people. And that person is going to attempt to get what they want, but they're going to make rash decisions without thinking about it before they do it. Let's say Kim Jong Un. Kim Jong Un acts like a kid, and he will just test his missiles and say, we have this, we have that, and we're so cool. And then it just flops right into the sea like nothing actually happens. But if he were to get a nuclear weapon, who's to say he wouldn't use it? He's very impulsive and very stupid. Now, that being said, if we contrast that with, for instance, China, again, or Russia, they're both the same when it comes to their tactics. Basically, China will go inch by inch by inch, and before you know it, they've taken over a massive amount of space. Now, that is more dangerous in the long run because they don't seem as aggressive and they don't seem as much of a major problem. But again, it's like before you know it, they've already taken everything. So this is an example of that. Okay, if we look at, for instance, the Spratly Islands. Okay, the Spratly Islands are essentially uninhabited. No one lives there. There's not much there, and most of them are reefs. So they're essentially underwater. Now, what the Chinese have been doing for the past, I don't know, 5+ years, is they have been collecting sand, extra sand. They have been shipping it over to these reefs and pumping the sand onto the reef, which is essentially creating a much bigger island. Now, these islands are like 1 square mile, maybe, but so they're still pretty small, but they are creating islands. Now, why are they doing that? Couple reasons. One is for the economic zone. So, again, if you have an island or any land within that 200, imagine there's a bubble of 200 miles into the ocean, like from your island, 200 miles out and around that is your economic zone. So anything that's underneath the water, again, oil, natural gas, whatever, that's all going to be yours. So that's part of it. Now, China claims that they are not doing this with military intent. But anyone with half a brain can figure out, yes, of course you're doing it with military intent. And again, it's this inch by inch issue of, okay, they're doing it slowly and hoping that no one notices. And before you know it, they're going to have the whole Spratlys. And if they have all the Spratly Islands, then they can claim a significant amount of that water. Now, if you look at this red line and you look at the key, it says 9-line area claimed by China. So this area, I mean, China feels like they have a legitimate claim to this. Anyone, again, with half a brain can tell you, no, that doesn't make sense. But to the Chinese, it does make sense. So for the Spratly Islands, it's not really for legitimacy because China already feels like they have legitimacy. So what that really means is that, again, it's more for military purposes. Okay, and they have done some things that I would feel are aggressive militarily. So, for instance, Vox has a great video, VOX has a great video about this, and they mentioned something called the Cabbage Strategy. Essentially, what this is they go around to these other reefs because other countries have been building some islands up as well. And so China doesn't like this because China claims all of these islands. So they will go up to an island and then they'll place their military ships strategically around the island to kind of close it off and that way preventing supplies from getting in. Basically, what that means is now the people will leave the island because they no longer can get supplies in, and therefore China can take it. Now, again, thinking from a military strategy viewpoint, on these islands that China is making, they are putting airstrips, they are putting naval bases, they are putting anti aircraft missiles and other things, other military things on these islands. It's not like they're putting a little boutique on these islands, they are putting military things here. So, this is a major issue. Now, Americans, we already have ships flowing through this area, mostly as a hey guys, we're watching you, so don't do anything too stupid. And we're right here in case something happens. But we're stuck between the bully and the person being bullied, which let's, for simplicity's sake, let's just call it the Philippines is being bullied here, and let's just say that China's being the bully. We are friends of the Philippines. We are their allies. We have lots of military people stationed over in the Philippines. We have been their friends for a very long time. And we have an obligation to help the Philippines and to protect them. Now, China, however, has a lot of our money and a lot of our business. So we have extraordinary economic ties to China. In addition to our economic ties, to go to war with China would be a very bloody thing to happen. So, I mean, in summation, to me, this boils down to a basic human flaw of being obsessed with mine. And I'm a capitalist. Like I can deal with like ownership of property and things like that. I have no problem with that. But also as a capitalist, I do believe in fairness. And anyone, any, 14-year-old kid in my class can tell you that these boundaries are not fair. But boundaries are not made to be fair. Boundaries are made to show you where my stuff is and where your stuff is. So it doesn't necessarily have to be fair. But what I'm predicting, and other people have predicted too, I'm not the first one to say this, is that this is going to be a major, major issue. Now, again, in that Vox video, Steve Bannon says it's probably going to happen within 6 to 10 years. I think it will probably be a little bit further in the future than that. And when it does happen, I'm not exactly sure what is going to happen. But I do think that the American military will get involved in some capacity just because the Philippines is right there. But again, I mean, America has made a statement about this, and essentially it was like, Philippines and China, can you just hug it out? Can you just like have a conversation about it? And we don't have to like fire bullets or anything crazy like that. So essentially what we were saying is, guys, just deal with it on your own because it's an awkward position for us. Now, it's kind of like if you have two friends who are fighting against each other, but you like them both and you don't want to get involved because it's not like your thing, but it is kind of your thing. So you don't really want to get involved, but you kind of like they're both expecting you to do something about it. That being said, China's like our fake friend. We pretend like we like China, but we don't in reality. Now, to wrap this up, this is not the only instance of China not pretending. They legitimately think that this is their land and their sea, okay? But this is not the only place that is the case. if we look at this map, if you look at the light blue, this is the area where if you look at basically any American world map, or probably most world maps around the world, you would see that the blue shape is going to be China. But if you look at the key, it's very interesting. China basically says for a few regions here on this map that they own it, but the local government can run it. So essentially, yeah, you guys, like, you can do your own thing, but remember, we own you. And so if we look at this, I mean, if you look at Tibet, like, I don't know if there's any, I don't know how many maps make Tibet a free space, a free area. I mean, that's been a thing for quite a while now, and they have really a lot of problems over there with the Chinese cracking down on them. So that's something to look into too if you're interested in borders or China or things like that, independence movements, because Tibet has it really really rough, and they're having a lot of violence over there and have for a while. But again, the South China Sea instance is not something that's rare for China, and this is a really, again, borders are very complicated, and so it's important to look at how countries view themselves and how the world sees them, because they can be two different things sometimes. Okay, I forgot to mention this, so I will. I know I've been going on too long, but if you're wondering, like, why is this area so important? Um, there's two main reasons. One is the resources themselves. So we're talking about billions of gallons or billions of barrels of oil underneath the ocean. So that is obviously a major thing, as well as natural gas. There's lots of natural gas under here as well, and the trade routes. This is a major trade route. 30% of the world's trade, if I remember correctly, goes through this area. So if you were to control this, you could make people pay a fee to get through. You could do a lot of damage. So it is a very important spot. Again, for Americans, it doesn't seem like a lot because who cares? It's Asia. Like, Americans don't really learn about Asia. Again, I'm saying that as a teacher of history in America, but we need to be paying attention to what's happening over there, because there could be some issues in the near future about that. So, I hope that was interesting. A lot of my kids, in especially one of the periods today, really was into this. And it's really, really interesting because I'm telling them that this is going to be some kind of war that happens. Again, my prediction is probably 10 to 15 years in the future. And I don't think it's going to be the start of World War III, but I think it has the potential to be a very big conflict. So just be aware of the kinds of things that are happening around the world. Just do a little bit of research. I mean, it takes, with Google, it takes, 10 minutes. Or you can go down the rabbit hole and stay on the internet for like 5 hours and still be reading stuff you haven't read before. So just be an informed person. Just know what's going on. You're not going to necessarily change anything. No one's going to solve this issue, but you might as well know what's happening in the world. So thank you for watching. If I misstated anything or if you have anything to add, please let's have a conversation in the comments, because I love to learn more. So please help me learn. Thank you. And yeah, that's it. Thanks.